Good morning, friends. It's wonderful to see so many gathered together. It may be that you haven't attended previous sessions. That's no problem. We'll have a short reporting session. It's very, very good to see everyone. Thank you very much for attending. And as usual, we start with a period of silent worship. So can we do that now, friends?
Welcome, friends. My name is Ruth McTighe, and I've been asked to be the elder for this event. I've read the draft epistle with great interest. You've obviously been having very thoughtful and challenging conversations, and I hope we can develop this today as we agree the final document. As we continue our meeting, can I remind everybody of the Zoom discipline that will help us all? Make sure you're muted unless you're asked to speak. If you need to leave your seat, please switch your camera off first. And please keep the stillness and uphold our speakers and each other as you would if we were meeting in person. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Ruth. So if anyone needs to contact Ruth during the course of the session, please type directly in the chat section to her. And unlike the previous sessions, I have to say this chat session is open to everyone for as reasons you'll see later on in the morning. So therefore, could I ask friends to exercise restraint and discipline about how they use the chat section and not private messaging to each other during the course of this session. As before, I'll start by covering some housekeeping issues. I have to say this introduction that I'll get to is a bit lengthy because there are a number of jobs I want to do, friends, including talking about the nature of QTIG, our work in the future, our founding principles, and also a little bit about how we'll be working this morning. So it's a bit lengthy, and I hope you'll bear with me. This session, like the others, will be recorded. Unlike the others, it won't appear on our website. But it'll be available to the steering group as a whole. And I've noticed a chat issue there. Chris, you might want to respond to that if that's possible. What we're calling so far the epistle, it might not be the best word. You might want to change that word in due course, but the document before you was sent out, was the document that we're going to work on today was sent out via Eventbrite, and we will hear it read aloud later on in the session. But if you haven't seen it, it would be a good use of the break time to locate your copy, because it actually is going to be the main subject of the second half of today's session. Excuse me one moment, my window is open and there's noise outside. Sorry about that. So when talking about this session, the joke of came to mind of the man who fell off the top of a 20-story building, and as he passed the first floor, he was heard remarking to himself, "Well, things are going well so far." So far, I think things have gone well. We've had some rich and satisfying contributions from all our speakers. But in a sense, this is the most demanding session. We said at the outset that we see this conference as a seedbed of ideas and a springboard for action. We also said that we hope for a clear statement which we could use to contact other groups. In Molly Scott Cato's terms, a kind of Arbroath declaration. The steering group reflected on what she said, and it was clear that such a declaration will need careful, discerned work to have the desired impact. So today we want to achieve a document, an epistle, a document from this conference, which will summarise where we are and allow people to have confidence in the fact that we are moving forward. That the steering group is committing itself to exploring a series of work streams. And because our discussions may be time-consuming, we've allotted 2 hours for this meeting. If we do complete our work early, we can spend our time in silent worship, upholding those taking the work forward. You might have noticed that I said the steering group would commit ourselves to exploring. The ability to undertake work in the future depends on you, the people gathered here today. If you are inspired by what you have heard, if you feel drawn to the work, then there will be an opportunity to indicate that on the survey, which will come to you at the end of the conference. The survey also takes into account things like, the stuff that worked well, the stuff that didn't work well, but you can indicate your preferred level of interest and how deeply you'd like to be involved as we go forward. I'll try and show you what I mean by screen sharing. So here's the steering group. And here we have people working on queuing. It's a Google group that you can sign up to. And I've used the word lurking because that's what someone used themselves. I apologize, she said, for lurking on the Google group and not being of any help. I don't feel I can help, but I am interested. And so that friend in particular reads our minutes that appear on the Google group. She often comments, but she doesn't feel that she can be actively involved. What's lacking at the moment is this group of engaged workers. And these smaller groups are designed to represent work streams that have been agreed and are being undertaken. And the work streams you can see are of different sizes. So some might be really, really big, needing a lot of people. By a lot, I mean, half a dozen or so. Others might just have a group of 2 or 3 working on it. But there are a number of work streams, and 6 is not the definitive number, it's just a representative number. And you can see that each work stream has got a connection to the steering group, possibly by having a member of the steering group as part of the work stream, not necessarily convening that work stream or being actively involved, but simply being there to make sure that there's this connection backwards and forwards between the steering group. Is that a perfect model of organisation? Probably not. Is it good enough to undertake important work? We hope so. Oliver Robertson, head of witness and worship at Friend's House, gave us sage advice right at the outset. Don't concern yourselves about building a beautiful structure. Concentrate on what you want to do. So please, let us know via the survey how you'd like to be involved in the future. Is it simply as a member of QTIG and interested in our work and upholding the work as we go forward? Or would you seek to be a more engaged person working on one of the work streams? I said we'd like to adopt our epistle today. Whatever we call it, we'd like to adopt it. Before we do so, just as one of our speakers spent some time carefully and helpfully working through key definitions central to her chosen topic, I think it might be useful to go over some basic understandings that we work by, some 8 principles that underpin the document we're about to share and will inform our work as we go forward. Number 1. In yearly meeting in 2012, Geoffrey Durham said, without the right holding of meeting, Quakers become a pressure group. It is not accidental that our steering group holds itself accountable to gospel order, with its meetings starting with silent worship, as have all the sessions of this conference. We are a religious community, not a pressure group. We do not do things in our own power. Next, as part of the Quaker community, we are aiming for the transformation of the world around us. We strive to bring the world closer to that which it is intended to be, a place where justice rolls down like water and righteousness as a living stream. We recognize the power of testimony. Our testimonies are not individual atomized formulations, but rather taken together, they are visible signs of a life lived in response to the Spirit. Such a life itself will be the testimony and will embody truth, integrity, simplicity, equality, and peace. We need to live that truth out in all our work. Number 4, in his Swarthmore lecture, Ben Pink Dandelion reminded us that we should work even with compromised institutions and in compromised situations as the best options available. In the faces I see before me, there are powerful examples of people who have done that. Ben Pink Dandelion goes on to say, every person is a precious child of God, and thus we work with everyone. We too need to learn to do so, no matter how personally difficult that might be. In that stirring lecture, Ben also wrote, liberal Quakers are absolute about the perhaps nature of theology. We regard any truth related to our beliefs to be partial, personal, or provisional. That is religious belief, friends. Yet the recognition of reality is central to truth. And while it may be that we need to undertake some careful sifting of the facts to discern what is real, part of reality is recognizing that some people lie for malign ends. They invent alternative facts. We can not only strive to be reconcilers, identifying and supporting those who evidence truth and integrity in their professional and political lives, we can also be assured and confident in our prophetic denunciation of what we see, all the time expecting better. Six, the work may well be very challenging. It's important not to be fearful of that scale of the task, or to doubt our own capacities to undertake it. In the words of Roy Stevenson, we all need the humility and the courage to lay self aside and let the divine do its work. The most frequently used phrase in the Bible is fear not. John McMurray tells us fear is destructive of reality. Fear also undermines our capacities and distorts perception. Seven, in recognizing the work is challenging, we need to recognize also it may be costly. As one of our steering group said in the meeting, we will know we're having an impact when they come after us. We may never be put to the test. But when contemplating such issues, I find great strength in my personal role model, who, when facing oblivion, prayed so hard his sweat was like blood. The conclusion of the prayer, thy will be done. And finally, friends, we need to recognize the long view. We nowadays laud John Woolman as a Quaker saint, if there is such a thing. We recognize his power because he appears as an image on our website. But the work against slavery started long before he was born. Who was the first person to stand up and denounce slavery in a meeting room filled with Quaker slave owners? They were several generations before John Woolman. We may never know their name, but it is their work which came to eventual fruition. It may be that we are laying down a path for others to follow. To summarize, friends, we're a religious community, not a pressure group. And as a religious community, we seek a world transformed. We ourselves need to be patterns and examples, recognizing that everyone we meet is a precious child of God. We can be confident in our prophetic role. Fear not. Thy will be done. And we can see ourselves as building a path into the future. So far, friends, I've talked about the organisation of QTIG, how you can get involved, and the principles underpinning our work. What of today? How will the rest of the morning proceed? Essentially, it will consist of two things: a reporting back of the sessions we've had so far, and after the break, working on the document, our epistle. I'll break that down a little bit further. So firstly, we'll have rapporteurs reporting back from each session for those people who missed out on the conference so far. They'll spend no longer than 5 minutes on that. We'll then have 5 minutes of silence while people can respond to any of the reports, all of the reports, none of the reports. And you can type your comment, if you have one, in the chat section for everyone. So everyone will have access to it. We don't envisage the need for any responses to these comments, but they can be made and will be captured on chat. And if you yourself have no comment to make, perhaps you would spend the time upholding friends who do. And just before the break, I'll speak again. I'm sorry, I need to speak quite a lot this morning, friends, but I'll speak again briefly to the task of the small group work that will happen after the break. After that, we will have a break of 15 minutes. Then we'll have a chance to work on the epistle. I'll say more about that task later, the task of the small group, but let me just say for now, we will need to exert the utmost discipline throughout the second half of the session. After we've responded to the epistle, and I'm hoping we adopt it today, it can subsequently appear on our website. And also, you may be interested to know that Peter Hossey and I will use it as the basis of a presentation we're making to a yearly meeting about the work of QTIG on Tuesday, May the 24th. If I remember rightly, it's at 11:30, but that can be confirmed. Tuesday, May the 24th, Peter Hossey and I. And I'll insert at this point that we haven't spotted a journalist from the Friend amongst us in our sessions. So Richard Seabohm has agreed to write a piece for submission to the Friend. Again, to summarise when I finish, 3 rapporteurs to offer a summary, 5 minutes for typing any response into the chat facility, me to introduce the work of small groups. We then take a break. After that, we'll be placed into breakout rooms immediately on return, and people have been really disciplined about returning promptly. Thank you. In breakouts, there'll be a clear task in the breakout session, and then we'll come back for plenary and hopefully adoption of the draft. The rapporteurs are David Harris, Martina Weitz, and Maureen Furness. And I'll call on those friends to, in that order, David, Martina, and Maureen, report on each of the sessions that they took notes on for our benefit. David, when you're ready.
Thank you. These are some points. Truth is cosmic, all suffusing more than just facts. Truth on the interpersonal level is linked to trust. It takes time to build trust. It can be destroyed quickly. So both truth and trust are fragile. People die, but truth lives on. For example, after the deaths of martyrs. Truth is unkillable, immortal. The lives of Jesus, for example, and early friends, for example, and of martyrs who have given their lives for truth down the centuries are emblematic. They live truth. Liberty of conscience, which early friends demanded, is essential. It is connected with the principles of liberal democracy, which we are called upon to defend. Non-violence is essential to living and exemplifying truth. People are meant to live peaceful lives. This is a religious and spiritual belief. Friends have found a way through our business method to go beyond disagreements and to discern God's will. Let us listen to other people's stories, which have their own truth in them. Some people's stories are not listened to, but they need to be listened to. Friends have some history in building bridges to the excluded, the so-called inferior. Friends still shoulder the tasks of being both prophets and reconcilers.
Thank you, David. That was some thoughts from the session from Ben Wood and Rachel Muirs. That was called Truth, a Theological Basis for Quakers. The next session was, Is Technology Unraveling Our Social Fabric? That consisted of a panel of Jane Dawson, Owen McCarthy, and John Martin. And I can see Owen in our group today. Martina, will you tell us what you gleaned from that session, please?
Thank you, Gerald. An introductory story spoke about the job of disruptors to challenge the way we see the world. Is social media, digital technology such a disruptor? And if so, how do we deal with it? We heard an assertion that human nature has not changed. There was always lying, bullying, and violence, and there was always kindness, consideration, and cooperation, and there still is. Social media platforms broadcast media without editorial controls for the purpose of social engagement. Without editorial control, without censorship, social media can make the world more transparent. There are no gatekeepers. Some action groups and movements would not have happened without social media. But the use of algorithms in social media leads to polarization, generates profits, and is intended to do so. It is not the platform that is the problem, it is the way it is used. We think that we need more regulation, but in regulating social media platforms, should they be regulated as publishers or producers of content or the raw material of publication? Think newspaper versus blank paper. Digital technologies are tools which make it easier for humans to do things. They have both conscious and unconscious bias. They are disruptors in terms of communication systems. There have been other major disruptors in communication: the invention of the written language, print, the radio, TV, the phone, the telegraph, the mobile phone. Each of them opened the space for humans to do more because their brains and time were freed from the constraints of the old means of communication. All these changed the social fabric, but did not unravel it, or did it? One of the requirements for living with and handling any of these disruptive changes has always been learning to use them effectively. When print was invented, people needed to be literate to benefit from it. Quakers are, at this stage, ill-equipped. We also looked at artificial intelligence and its uses, where computers are programmed to learn from us and make intelligent choices on our behalf. AI has only unconscious bias. AI is bringing real benefits in many fields, including medicine and social policy implementation, but there are also negative impacts. So the key points are: how good is the design? How well is the development controlled and peer reviewed in scientific terms? How well audited are the applications? And how well regulated is any of it? Legislation and regulation need to be transparent, and there is a need for contributions to this process from groups that stand for public interest. The Just Algorithm Action Group, co-founded by Owen, one of our speakers, are actively engaged in this. And there is a need for ethics education around artificial intelligence. Now is a good time for Quakers to speak truth to power on these issues. The questions that were raised in breakout rooms covered a range of issues relating to data mining, opting out of advertising online through subscription services, and asking the right questions about who owns the platform, how it is funded, who makes the money, how transparent is it about who is behind it, how we get government to spend the necessary time and money on regulation in this area, and how we get involved in this and develop the necessary expertise. For me, there were 4 learning points. The assertion that human nature has not changed. The fact that digital technology, social media, and AI are disruptors like others before them, and that we can learn how to use them effectively. That there is a critical need for technical literacy, and we need to develop that, and that Quakers can use these social media for good purposes, for our purposes, but we need to get better at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Our final session on Wednesday was lack of transparency in the use and abuse of power, and Molly Scott Cato talked to us about that. Maureen, would you lead us in thinking about that one, please?
Yes. So she started by talking about the UK and how it is losing its struggle for liberal democracy. The present government is a threat to democracy. It is attacking the rule of law, acting outside constitutional conventions, such as the prorogation of Parliament, flouting the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the proposal to send refugees to Rwanda. Umberto Eco listed 14 signs of fascism. In 2016, Molly Scott Cato looked at this in detail, and all 14 criteria were met by the UK government. The system is broken. People are questioning democracy and choose to believe lies. Many institutions, such as the trade union, the churches, are in decline, and the BBC is under constant attack. What are we called upon to do as Quakers? Molly suggests that first, we could create a formal declaration for people to sign, such as the Arbroath Declaration in 1320, where the Scottish asked the Pope to recognise Scottish independence. This later influenced the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. The right words have enormous power and are remembered by people. Following that, once the declaration is established, we could join a campaign for UK democracy and a written constitution, bringing in like-minded individuals, institutions, other religious groups, etc., who would work towards the control of information on the media, newspapers, social media, limiting lobbyists in Parliament, for example. The German constitution and multi-party system is quoted as a good model. Politicians have to build coalitions and work together, but working together requires very hard work and clarity. It's common sense that people in the UK are not all equal under the law. We need to remind people of these matters, and also to remind people that truth and integrity matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. So now this period of reflection that people might want to use by typing into the chat any comments, thoughts, responses to anything you've heard this morning in terms of reporting back, or anything that you, if you've attended that session, anything that occurred to you during that session that you'd like recorded, because we capture the chat. It's not ephemeral. It doesn't disappear. It's captured and recorded. So a short period of silence, friends, in which friends might respond. And if you have no comment, then let's just uphold the friends who do have a comment. So can we close this session, this part of the meeting, friends, and move on with a few comments about what will be in front of us after the break. When we come back from the break, we'll be placed in small groups. The idea of this small group discussion is to test out your responses to this document before us. Whether we call it an epistle or not is neither here nor there. But it's looking at this document in some length and hearing yourself making comments so that you can test them out and be disciplined in the plenary session. It's not a minute, and neither is it yet the equivalent to the Arbroath Declaration that Molly Scott Cato spoke about, a kind of clarion call for action. It is rather an attempt to get to the heart of the conference and capture its spirit. So the question is, does it do that well enough to stand? That's the question that needs to be addressed in the small groups, I think. Is the epistle good enough to stand? Ignoring dots and commas, and if you have issues around dots and commas, if there are points about dots and commas, do by all means send them to Martina White's, she will be able to pick those up. Dots and commas issues. But if there's something which is seriously awry or inaccurate, or you can't subscribe to in all conscience, clearly that needs to be addressed, and there'll be an opportunity to do so. But the fundamental question is it good enough, friends? Is it good enough? If it is good enough, then this is a plea to let it stand, because our major interest is in the work streams. To paraphrase that sentence of Oliver's, let's not worry about creating a beautiful epistle. Let's get on with the work. This epistle commits the steering group to one crucial piece of work, which it will be the declaration. And the steering group, calling on the skills of others, will undertake to do that. But as for the rest, friends, as I hope I've made clear, it very much depends on you pitching in if you're able. What work stream is absent? What else needs to be done? Looking around the sea of faces, you may well think, as a matter of urgency, they need to recruit young people. Well, that will be a helpful work stream to identify, as long as, with the proviso that you're willing to identify yourself in the evaluation report as being willing to work towards that. What I'm asking you to do, friends, in looking at the work stream and making suggestions and recommendations, is not so much to think of in terms of they and them, but of us and me. We have no other hands, friends. Let's take a break there so that we can go into those small groups when we return at 11:30, friends. 11:30. Thank you very much. Friends, I'm going to resume. There are issues around the epistle. We are going to hear the epistle. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough in the first half. I will share my screen with the epistle, and Jan, our assistant clerk, will now read it aloud.
Here is the epistle. We find ourselves at a time when the shared acceptance of the means by which the truth is discerned in the public realm has collapsed. This leads to a sense of shifting ground beneath our understanding of truth. In light of this, the Quaker Truth and Integrity Group arranged an online conference which took place over the weekend of the 25th of April, 2022. Over 100 friends took part in 4 sessions of deep discernment. Every so often, a cultural tide sweeps across the affairs of a nation. This happened in this country with the advent of the welfare state and the National Health Service. A spirit of solidarity born out of the privations of the war and the Great Depression of the 1930s reflected a sense of optimism and purpose. This happened again, but in a different direction towards the end of the 20th century, in favor of the individual, entrepreneurship, and a process of privatization that put profits first and public welfare second. Now, it would appear we have entered a new and deeply troubling phase in our history. Standards of truthfulness and integrity in public and commercial life are being undermined to the extent that democracy itself is under threat. Often, this is taking place subtly and piecemeal. We see signs of fascism emerging, where truth is deliberately distorted, where politicians claim alternative facts, where the very basis of democracy is being destroyed. We see the internet, social media, and the widespread use of algorithms in the development and implementation of public policy as part of and as symptoms of this development. But we do not see these technologies as intrinsically good or bad. They exist in the same way as other revolutions in the way people communicate, such as the written word, the printed word, telecoms, radio, and TV. And it is how they are used that determines whether they contribute to a vibrant democratic society or militate against it. We were reminded by one speaker that early Quakers held that people should have the right to disagree. Citizens should have the means of seeking truth together through a framework of law as a means of preserving public peace. Minorities should be protected from overmighty majorities who might hound out dissent. In his view, Quakers were major contributors to the development of what we call liberal democracy and representative government. And we hold fast to this conviction, now expressed in Advices and Queries number 34. Remember your responsibilities as a citizen for the conduct of local, national, and international affairs. Do not shrink from the time and effort your involvement may demand. All this is set against the backdrop of the climate emergency and COVID, and a deeply destructive resistance to the acceptance of scientific findings. This matters because such resistance, just like the resistance to verifiable facts, is corroding the trust we need to have for a functioning democratic society. We heard clear calls for a fundamental overhaul of our democratic institutions. A constitutional convention or commission convened by a broad coalition of civil society organizations and faith groups, a declaration of what are acceptable norms in public life, politics, business, and media. We need to re-establish trust in the division of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, where disagreement is worked through without vilifying the people involved. We heard a call for establishing norms in public behavior which allow for losers' consent, and where the contest between ideas and ideologies is played on a fair and level pitch, where those who do not win the argument can accept the result without feeling that the winning side won by lying and manipulating the public. The Quaker Truth and Integrity Group commits itself in this epistle to take this work forward. We invite you to join us. We see the immediate priorities for our work to be formulating a public declaration advocating the renewal of our democratic institutions, the ethical norms that govern them, and working to gain support from others for that declaration. Organizing a series of webinars with politicians and others in public life who support the ethical norms embedded in this declaration. Working with other groups who are addressing the same and similar issues. Educating ourselves and others on matters of politics to be better equipped to understand the decisions that are taken on our behalf and in our name, and to challenge them, both in their development and in their implementation. Revealing and publicizing the extent to which politicians of different parties work together in Parliament for the common good. Educating ourselves and others in finding ways to question the messages we receive through all the news channels, whether with or without editorial control being applied. Educating ourselves more in terms of digital literacy. Finding ways of upholding those people in public life who have the courage to do the right thing, to be truthful and to act with integrity. We are considering developing an award in this context. We are energized and encouraged by the participation in and response to our initial work in convening this conference. We see this work as of this moment, critical, urgent, important, and laid on us. Please join us in this work if you can. Please uphold us in other ways if you can't. We remind ourselves and each other of the words of our Advices and Queries 37 and 38. Are you honest and truthful in all you say and do? Do you maintain strict integrity in business transactions and in your dealings with individuals and organizations? Do you use money and information entrusted to you with discretion and responsibility? Taking oaths implies a double standard of truth. In choosing to affirm instead, be aware of the claim to integrity that you are making. If pressure is brought upon you to lower your standard of integrity, are you prepared to resist it? Our responsibilities to God and our neighbor may involve us in taking unpopular stands. Do not let the desire to be sociable or the fear of seeming peculiar determine your decisions.
Thank you, Jan. Now, with the ideas behind us of good enough and us, me, Could we go into our small groups, friends? And Chris will place us in that into small groups.
Gerald, could you stop sharing your screen first, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Welcome back, friends. Thank you ever so much. So we have 25 minutes before our closing worship. My suggestion will be that we would work for about 10 minutes and take comments on the draft epistle, and then the last 15 minutes we'll take comments on work to do going forward. We'll see how that works out. I've never done this before, friends, I have to say. If I get stuck, Jan, my assistant clerk, and I will go into a little breakout room together. I've got the epistle on a screen in front of me. We can take comments on the epistle, please. And the way to do that is by, if you're not used to Zoom, find the little reaction button and if you press the reaction button, you'll see a little raised hand, which you can then raise and signal my attention, and I'll call you to speak. And assisted by Chris. And Peter Hossey wants to speak, I can see. And Richard Seabold.
Thank you, Gerald.
Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Gerald. One point which came out very strongly from the group that I was a part of, and I had seen it in the chat prior to that, and that was with the word fascism. There are some connotations around the word fascism in which it tends to be something which the left wing uses against the right, and it would be very easy to the statement and to replace it possibly with authoritarianism or populism. I'm sure there were other points as well, but I think that one was the overriding.
Yes, I've got that point, Peter. You're drifting in and out, but I've got that point. Thank you. Could I ask friends not to put things in the chat because I really find it distracting. I will call on as many people as possible to speak. Richard, Jonathan, and Ruth Kettle-Frisbee. Richard Seabohm, Jonathan Dale, and Ruth Kettle-Frisbee. In that order, please.
Our group 8 came up again with a fascism point, which has now been taken. It was also thought that the document itself is very long for a lot of people to take on board, and possibly we need to keep it as our own aide-memoire and possibly have somehow find a I can't remember the term, but a more user-friendly version for general circulation. And we talked about the process of the section saying the process of privatization, profits first and public welfare second. We didn't necessarily want to, as it were, imply that all privatization has been unfortunate. Some has possibly just been good. So that sentence could just end at the word privatization.
Thank you. Jonathan Dale?
Yes, I think our group was generally feeling that for this purpose, the epistle was good enough. There were some feelings that there were gaps that needed perhaps to be addressed in the longer term, particularly in my case over the issue of power and the increasing imbalance of power and wealth, making for inequality, which is very difficult to combine with true democracy. the greater the imbalance of power, it seems to me, the harder it is to get to any real democracy. Maybe we need to put that emphasis, and maybe we need to find ways in which we can attenuate it, meanwhile, through things like citizens' assemblies, where, and again, there was a feeling that critical awareness and education is part of it, but it's also the social system and the economic system that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I'll just make the point that none of that appeared in any of the speakers, and we're trying to capture what came out of the conference so far. However, I could see that actually could be a very powerful work stream. Thank you very much for that. Ruth Kettle-Frisbee.
Hello. It was decided that we would speak for ourselves because a lot was said. We felt that would be more effective. So yeah, just I felt there was a sentence about minorities who need to be protected, and I felt that due to the nature of power imbalance, that minorities ought to be empowered as well as protected. And also when it talked about social media, how they are used, how the platforms are used, I suggested used and regulated. And then the other point about the phrase alternative facts, which sounds to me like an absurdity. That might be alternative facts. You know, it sounds paradoxical to me, but perhaps that's a more widely used phrase that I'm not aware of. Thank you.
Again, the idea of minorities, I think, was picked up. All that was being used was quoted from Ben Wood's talk, I think, about minorities being protected. But I've taken the point on about that you've made there. Alternative facts is quoting an American politician who disputed the size of President Trump's gathering at his inauguration speech, when it was evidence that actually it was smaller than that for Obama. She said there are alternative facts. And that's the world we live in. But thank you for that. And we're on to Peter Hadley and Noel Staples and Anne Wilkinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerald. Yeah, speaking for myself, individual, the bullet points in the epistle seem fine at one level. There didn't seem to be a clear purpose in the opening paragraph of that section, a reference to behavioural norms, I believe. And in our group, we concluded that the first three paragraphs of the epistle were a kind of an introduction background, and that may reflect the purpose not being crystal clear and brought out in front.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And Noel Staples.
Yes, in response to what Peter Hussey was saying first, I'd originally wanted to add one sentence to the fifth paragraph, which just said, populism is appealed to with simple slogans like get Brexit done, make America great again, or drain the swamp. It was Kellyanne Conway who produced the alternative facts about crowd size, but those three slogans would immediately trigger a response in people. That's what I was thinking, because they're very recognizable.
I'd like to move soon onto the work streams, please. But Anne Wilkinson, Owen, and Mo Kelly.
Thank you, Gerald. Yes, just to confirm what has just been said earlier, we had some concern with the opening of the epistle, primarily because I couldn't understand it. Apologies for that, friends, but I wasn't honestly clear what we meant. And there was a sense that if the epistle is to go, well, it will go to friends, but then hopefully it might expand further. We need to be crystal clear right from the very beginning of the epistle about what we're talking about. And there was rather too much of a kind of an introduction to it. We felt we could be a bit punchier. And the second issue was, again, coming back to the work streams, all of which were good. But what I was seeing was that there were areas where certainly the first 3 work streams should link together. And then we had a danger with the epistle in the way that it was written, that they might be seen as independent pieces of work, when in fact they need to work together and need to be confirmed. I mean, for instance, if we're holding webinars with people who agree with us, why? What are we doing? And it should be so it's about being clearer about what we're trying to do there. I do apologize about, because it does actually ask the epistle drafters to go away and do a bit more work, but I think it's important that we get this right, because it'll be a real sounding board to take forward to other friends.
Thank you, Anne. And Owen, and
very briefly,
and Barbara.
Just very briefly, Ruth Kettle-Frisbee speaks my mind on the phrase alternative facts. Can I suggest that the word facts gets put in inverted commas now that you've explained to us its origin?
Thank you. And Mo?
You're muted, Mo. Need to unmute first.
Thank you. It's a simple suggestion, but I think it's fairly significant. At the beginning of the epistle, there's reference to politicians, and it isn't particularly favourable. Seems to suggest that all politicians have a certain way of behaviour. I would suggest the insertion of the word "some politicians." I haven't got the text. I haven't seen the text in other than this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Barbara, are you muted?
Sorry, wrong one. Oh dear, sorry about that. Yeah, our group was actually very supportive of the whole epistle, and quite excited by it, and glad that that was a good starting place. The point I wanted to make, there was a person called John who had a book that was made by the first Quaker group. Well, I don't know about the first, but Quaker group recently set up on integrity and truth, and then laid down, and then we started up again. So, and they had written a book which might be very useful for us to look at. Or to have, a citing of as a sort of because this has been a long, slow development over so many years of a sort of degenerating democracy with fewer people voting, and a sort of lethargy in the community to actually take democracy seriously and responsibility for it, and also citizens assemblies was also discussed as a possible good thing to be looking into.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you. John Lampard and Anna van Staveren. And could we think about the work to be done in the future, friends? Can we turn our attention in that direction? But John, please.
Yes, there was never a full write-up of the Truth and Integrity group in the past. There was a small book brought out by Linda Pegler, which is workshops for meetings. That's the only documentation you'll get from there.
And I think Noel Staples is holding it up to the screen as we speak. So I'm sure one way or another we can get hold of that. Thank you, John. Thank you, Noel. Anne?
Yes, thank you. Just 2 quick points. I would start this epistle actually in paragraph 5. We have entered a new and deeply troubling phase in our history. That's where I would start this. And secondly, whenever we use the word we, can we be clear who we mean? There are so many references to we in this, that I don't know who is we.
Thank you, Anne. I'm hearing very clearly the need for clarity and for brevity, and that these can be addressed. And that's a helpful suggestion which will be considered, and the we can be picked up. Danielle Perrett?
Yes, the word judiciary is mentioned in the epistle, but it's not mentioned at all in the 8 points of what we want to focus on and part of our work. So I think it probably needs just to be added into that list, perhaps on the basis of it being in the epistle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we've recorded the idea that there was a publication that's been captured in chat somewhere. So as we take the work forward, friends, is there anything in those bullet points? And I've heard that there might be need for some rearrangement, but is there anything in the bullet points that is missing? We've just heard a contribution about judiciary. Is there anything which is clearly not there? Is there anything that you feel drawn to that needs to be recorded at this point? Richard is looking to speak. Remember to raise your electronic hand, Richard. I did catch you this time, but I might not capture next time. And I've got various electronic devices that help me capture people who raise an electronic hand. Where have you gone, Richard? You need to unmute.
We mentioned in our group question of fraud in the sense that an awful lot of people are actually finding it possible to make a living out of fraud at the moment, you know, with all the calls you get on the phone and this business of the guaranteed bank loans, that the climate of that we've been talking about does extend to the people in the population who now feel free to be fraudulent.
Thank you. Pamela Hogan, and then our friend Noel again.
Very briefly, it was mentioned in passing, but where we have the two words educating ourselves and others, I felt the focus needs to be very specifically on promoting critical thinking about media, about message, about digital elements, whether in schools or community, how we'd have to address, but just promoting critical thinking and analysis for people to make more informed decisions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pamela. And Noel?
Very quickly, I just wondered if there should be one group addressing itself to the threats to democracy directly.
Thank you. As in identifying threats to democracy? No, could I just be clear on that one? Do you mean identify the threats to democracy?
Yes, to identify, yes, to identify, actually name them, write them down, say what they are.
Thank you, Noel. Peter and Tony Philpott. Peter Hussey.
Very brief point, Gerald. You missed Till Geiger just then, who had his electronic hand up, but you moved on to the one beyond him. So you might like to go back to Till to see if he had something to say still.
That's really helpful. Sorry, what was that name? Because you're into
Till Geiger. Till Geiger.
Thank you. So, Tony, would you mind if we look to Jill Geiger first then? Jill, I can't see you, but by all means, unmute, please.
Hi.
There we are, Till, yes.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it may be too obvious to Quakers, is, you know, we don't talk about peace, we don't talk about militarism and kind of the discourse that's around that, democratic institutions, but also how we relate to the rest of the world and international relations. This is just totally something that's absent, even so we talk a lot about the international trends. I think, you know, we should embed ourselves in the wider community and how we relate to it, particularly in a post-Brexit environment where we have actually a bizarre discourse about who our friends and allies are and so on. And
thank you. Tony and Peter and Ruth.
Thank you, Gerald. In terms of the bullet points, it could be that this is covered by the steering group, but I am a bit surprised that there isn't one talking about our relationship as a group to Quakers as a whole. And I'm thinking particularly of Friends House, Recording Clerk, QPSW, Quaker Life, and so on. We are part of that organization, and I think, I mean, clearly there is a history of discussion at sufferings and so on about truth. There have been discussions about the role of QPSW recently, and this group has, in a sense, come off the back of those sorts of discussions and our disappointment with them. So I just wondered whether we do need a group of people who will concentrate on passing on what we're doing to them and working with them and trying to involve them where necessary. For example, the recording clerk often speaks on behalf of Quakers, and maybe he should be speaking on behalf of us when we have important things to say. So I just leave that with you, Gerald, to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. And just to respond very briefly, we've had constant advice from Oliver Robertson and the assistant recording clerk about establishing ourselves as a Quaker recognised body and support in that direction. And we're currently working with Grace DaCosta on talking to other organisations and groups. So there is that interchange going on. It may not be as full as some of us would like, but there is an interchange and knowledge is being passed in both directions. Just to say that. It might need noting, Tony, I accept that as well. Peter and then Ruth.
Thank you, Gerald. The bullet referring to digital literacy, I think there's probably quite a bit of work needed doing on there, particularly as the government managed successive versions of the online harms safety bill, so-called, to start with what looked like safety, and then it went through media literacy, and I've forgotten where they've gone to now, but it does seem as if underneath the hood, if you like, people are playing with words like that, and I think they need to be brought to the surface and say, can we please be clear on what digital literacy is? So I think that's an important piece of work.
And thank you. And just to respond that, from Owen's contribution on Tuesday, it's clear that there needs to be a conversation, a more formal conversation between, I can see you're part of JAG, between JAG and us. There can be much more work, overlapping and coordinated work, I think, there. Ruth, and then Rex Ambler.
I was going to say I don't want to open a can of worms, but I do want to open a can of worms. I think there should be more on structural inequality in there. I think there should be something on structural inequality, because it's been really clear, particularly in the media lately, how truth and integrity are disadvantaging when these things are not, when people are not speaking and acting in good faith according to truth and integrity. It's people who are marginalized, who, that's deepening our existing structural inequalities, I think this needs to be alluded to and needs to be addressed.
My own response would be that's not a can of worms. That's a very valid and sane point, Ruth. Thank you very much indeed. Rex.
Can I pick up on that can of worms, or rather that very valid point, as you said, Gerald? In fact, pick up on a couple of other things that have been said about the question of power and the imbalance of power, which leads to this sort of situation, about international global forces, which puts pressure on governments, journalists and others to behave in a certain way, on our education and our practice in journalism, which has been commented on. I would think these all suggest that we could have a special group looking at the causes of the present collapse in competence and in truth. And I would think we might be able to discern things that other groups wouldn't get to quite so easily. This, in fact, is pursuing our truth, the truth of what is happening now in our country and our world, and bearing witness to it without pointing the finger, without blaming individuals, without polarizing the situation, but genuinely opening up what is happening and why we are under. I think that sort of understanding will help us much better to know what to do about it, to know what is a pertinent Quaker response, but also what will be ringing bells for people across the country who are obviously very concerned about what's happening.
Thank you, Rex. Friends, it's 12:26. We're getting to the point where we really need to rest in worship to close. The conversation that we've had has been recorded. Those points have been heard. If you've made a comment in chat, as I've said, that's been picked up and will not be lost. I'm deeply appreciative of everyone who's gathered. Some of the faces have been very faithful to all 4 sessions. Thank you very much indeed. For those of you who've only been able to come today, it's been very, very worthwhile, your observations and your comments. We will take forward whatever word we're going to use for this document, and it will be shaped in response to these comments that we've heard. The next piece of work that we can see is this declaration that needs to be a second piece of work. And there are some challenging pieces of work involved as we go forward. And I would urge, friends, if you feel at all called, if you feel in any way drawn, to make that clear on your evaluation sheet so we can pick up your name and get in contact with you more directly. Friends, a very, very deep and sincere thanks to everyone gathered today. Let us worship together briefly. could I thank all members of the steering group for their superb efforts. Martina for drafting the original document that we've looked at today. Chris Robertson has been superb in making sure that it all works. A man behind the scenes, but he's made sure it's all worked. Thank you ever so much, Chris. And thank you to you for attending today. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our events or one of our pieces of work in the future. Thank you one and all. Farewell.